Welcome to analysis of game number 3 of the World Chess Championship 2018 World Champion Magnus Carlsen against Fabiano Caruana. And in the third game, Caruana once again had the white pieces, and the question was, would they repeat the opening from the first game? And yes, they did. Once again, the Sicilian, once again, the Rossolimo variation here, 3 bishop b5. And the first one to deviate, in fact, was Caruana on move 6. Here he played castle instead of what he played in game 1, h3. And already here, Carlsen played a slightly unusual move, the move queen to c7, only been played 19 times according to my database. The main moves played over a few hundred times are the moves knight f6 and e5. So let's see queen c7. What's the point? It's somewhat of a waiting move, and the queen belongs to c7 anyways in those kind of positions. So black is simply waiting on how white will set up his pieces. And Caruana decides on rook e1 with the intention to grab space, play e5, and that's why black responds playing e5 himself. So in this general position, white has two different kind of plans. Either what we saw in game 1, he pushes f4 and first moves the knight out of the way, of course. But this plan doesn't really make that much sense here, as white has already played rook to e1, and in order to make that happen, he would also play the rook. He would also need to play the rook back to f1 and simply lose a lot of time in the process. So the other plan we see in this game is to play on the queen side by going a3, preparing b4, and trying to open up files on the queen side to attack the queen side pawns there of black. Knight f6, b4 right away, and Carlsen simply ignores it and goes castle. Here Caruana played knight bd2, but in fact he could have taken black up on the offer, take the pawn on c5. This would have been a critical move. Now if black tries to regain the pawn right away with knight d7, and white can protect the pawn, and now f5 with the intention to attack the bishop and then take. But in the meantime, white goes a4, f4, bishop c1 back, and now bishop a3. The bishop goes on this diagonal, pins the knight, forcing b6. And either here or in the next move, white can take on c5, and you see that the black pawn structure is not to be envied, with a lot of isolated and also doubled c-pawns. And white has a nice knight outpost on c4. So this position seems to be a bit better for white, even though it's not that clear cut as black has the bishop here. The position is still rather closed, and there might be some attacking options here on the king side. So position is still complex, but it feels like white should have a slight edge. Of course, black doesn't have to go for this with knight d7 in this position. By the way, this is still a sample variation, not the game. He could also play bishop e6 and simply develop, but still, he would have to prove how he's going to win back the pawn, because white can also protect the pawn this way, maybe knight bd2, knight b3 as well. And black has to prove what is his compensation, or how will he regain the pawn sooner or later. So I believe this was a critical try, and more critical than knight bd2. Now Carlsen played bishop g4, h3, right away attacking the bishop. The bishop has to take or retreat. Going to h5 wouldn't work because g4 traps the bishop, so this is not an option, and Carlsen took on f3 and took on b4. And here white is actually happy about black taking on b4 because it opens up the a file for the rook, and Carlsen wanted to fight for the a file right away and played a5. However, this leaves him in a slightly inferior position. Probably he should have gone knight d7 first to better be prepared for the opening of the a file. I guess that he wasn't too happy about bishop d2 coming and stopping black from going a5, but still the black position is fairly solid. For example, rook fe8, queen b1, a6. White can put the queen here on, place on a good square here on b3, let's say, but black also has his options, knight f8, knight e6. White is maybe a tiny bit better, but the position feels pretty close to equality. After a5, b takes a5, rook takes a5, white is better here, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Here Caruana played bishop d2, but even better was rook takes a5. After queen takes a5, bishop d2, the queen has to retreat to c7 to keep the pawn on e5 defended. And now white goes queen a1, attacks the pawn on e5 once more and occupies the a file. Knight to d7, and now a move such as queen a2. And white is better here, because for one, he's controlling the a file. He has the better minor piece, the better bishop here against the black bishop, which is limited by its own pawn, whereas the white bishop can freely move within their own pawn chain. And this is probably most importantly, white has just one pawn island here. All these pawns are one pawn island, they can all protect each other, whereas black has two pawn islands, 1 and 2. And especially these pawns here on the queen side are somewhat vulnerable, especially the pawn on b7. We can imagine white going for this pawn, rook b1, queen a7, provoking some further weaknesses, and black is a little bit in the defense. Most importantly here though, I would say black doesn't really have any chance to play for win himself. So this would have been a pretty pleasant position for Caruana. Maybe also what he wanted to achieve. Maybe he thought it doesn't matter how he starts, but after bishop d2, black doesn't have to take on a1 and transpose to a position we just saw, but Carlsen played the smart move rook a8 and therefore keeps fighting for the a file. Now Caruana went queen b1, knight to d7, queen b4, rook fe8, also preparing potentially bishop f8 and protecting pawn e5 once more. And either here or the next move probably would make the most sense for white to play a move like queen c3, then trade off rooks and trade off the other rook, and at least still control the a file. White is still slightly better, but I think he cannot really hope for much, because without the rooks there's even less potential in the position, and after all the black position doesn't offer that many weaknesses, and I think black should hold without any big difficulties. After bishop c3, b5, once more queen b2 would be a sensible move. Caruana played rook takes a8 and offered the trade of all rooks. And now the position is simply equal, because it's actually black who's occupying the a file and is getting a little bit active here. Queen a2 goes for the c2 pawn. White has no good way other than queen b2 and allow the queen trade. And in this endgame, it's actually black who's a tiny bit more comfortable. And why is that? Because he has more space here on the queen side and therefore can press a little bit. Here it doesn't really matter much anymore that black has more pawn islands than white, because white doesn't have any good way to attack these pawns. So weaknesses are only weaknesses if you can attack them, and here it is just not the case. Now king f1, king f7, king e2, both sides approaching with the king. The king in the endgame is an important piece. Since it is not in any danger of being checkmated, you want to get it involved and get it active. Now knight c5, bishop c3, knight e6, and here maybe a small inaccuracy by Caruana. There's this slightly unpleasant move, knight f4, and Caruana stops by going g3, but therefore ever so slightly weakening his pawn chain there on the king side. Instead, bishop d2 was also a possibility to stop knight f4, then white could just take, and in this manner white would just keep the pawns where they are and not create any weaknesses. After g3, bishop f8, knight d2, knight g5 was a nice move by Carlsen, provoking another pawn advance. Now white has to go h4. And why did Carlsen provoke this pawn move? So that the pawn is here on a dark square, the same color as the black bishop, and then this could be a factor later on. So Carlsen's very good in provoking these small weaknesses, collecting them, and then trying to use them later on. Still, the position is equal, but black is making some progress, and white doesn't have a way to force a draw right away. h5, now the pawn is fixed here on h4, bishop d2. Here Carlsen played bishop d6, just to show you what I mean. Carlsen could have also gone g5, and then after bishop e3, g takes h4, g takes h4. Now this pawn is a weakness. Black can attack it with his bishop, whereas this bishop cannot attack this pawn on h5. So this is the difference, and this is why Carlsen fixed the pawns or provoked the pawn to be on h4. Black played bishop d6 here, now c3, c5, bishop e3, king e7. The king goes over to the queen side and white does the same. Now with the king being away, black goes f5 and the king returns, goes king d1. By the way, king d2 would be a big mistake because then f4 would trap the bishop. This would be one way to lose. So this is why the king always goes over d1 via d1, so the bishop can still retreat to c1 or d2. And here Carlsen took on e4, and I think this was premature. I think he should have kept attention because that allows him to not only take on e4, but also keep the option of playing f4 in the future. So moves such as bishop e7, then maneuver around some more and wait for a better time to dissolve the tension in the center. I think this was a better try because after f takes e4, d takes e4, this looks nice for black to have a potential pass pawn here on the queen side, but the white defense has gotten a lot easier. The structure is set and white can now prepare for it, and in fact Caruana had no problems to defend from here on. It followed knight c5, white traded the knight against the bishop because he saw that this position is not threatening at all. Knight f1, the knight wants to get to better squares here, especially the square d5 would be quite nice. And Carlsen played b4, now creating a pass pawn, but this pass pawn is not going anywhere. Knight to e3, king c5, now f4, trading more pawns, and with every pawn trade, of course, the draw becomes more likely, and here, in fact, it is simply a draw. Black takes on f4, now goes bishop to a5, and another pawn trade, f5 is forced, g takes f5, and here, cute little move. Of course, Caruana could also take back on f5, but he played knight takes c4 instead, giving up his knight for the pawn, because in this position, black only has one pawn left. This pawn he would need to win. Bishop alone won't do it, but black has the wrong bishop on the opposite color of the promotion square on h1, and all white needs to do here is put the king on h1. Black can never get it out of there. He would either stalemate him or is just not able to get this king out of the corner. So this is just a dead draw, and this is why the players agreed to draw in this position. So in this game, Caruana had a little bit better opening preparation, or at least he got the better position out of the opening. He put some pressure on Carlsen and didn't keep it for too long. This was his problem. Some inaccurate moves actually led to him having to defend in the end game. In the end, it wasn't a huge task to defend the end game. He held it with ease, but it didn't have to come to that. Caruana was very comfortable in the middle game, and with some more precise moves, I think he could have asked some questions to Carlsen for a long time and put up pressure for a long time and not have to defend at all in the game. And then with some inaccurate moves, Carlsen slowly overtook the initiative and got some advantage, tried to press, but in the end, Caruana hold the draw. So after 3 games, 1.5, 1.5, game number 4 is on Tuesday. Then again, Carlsen with the white pieces. And if you would like to be notified when I publish the analysis for the next games, then please subscribe to my channel, and then I'll see you again very soon. Until then, bye bye.